Hey there, and welcome back to the recap of session 5. I'm going to try and make this one as succinct as I possibly can. I realize that I tend to be very, I don't know, I guess we might say complete? Complete? No, that's not a word. Thorough. I guess we might say that I can be rather thorough. So today I'm going to try and get right to it. So if you remember, we've got this porcupine, and we are using this as our subject for Lightroom's AI denoise function. So we're just going to click on denoise. We are, of course, in the develop module, in the detail tab here of the tools. And here we have a preview that's going to load. And we have a couple of things right here. First of all, denoise is checked. That's why we're here. That's what we want. We can affect the amount of denoise. Right here, we're going to leave it at 50. If I remember correctly, the results we got were quite good, actually. And here, it's going to load a bit of a preview. You can just click and hold on it, and it will show you the before and after. Really quite accurate. Like, we live in amazing times. Here you know that these are grayed out. Can't really do anything about that. And here the create stack checkmark is checked. It's going to create a stack, and we'll show you what that means. Estimated time 3 minutes. Better get on with it. But don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch the entire thing. I am going to time skip. I will note that we've got a little progress circle here, and also a progress bar up here where it's creating a DNG using denoise. So this is going to denoise, but also it's going to create a new raw file in the digital negative format for us to use. So our original remains untouched. Okay, now denoise has done its thing, and if we zoom in, we have a really, really excellent looking photo here. Basically all the noise is cleaned up, or at least as much as you would want for it to not look fake. And I think this is really great. Now, if we come down here, you'll notice things are a little bit different than they are or were on the computer lab computers. Here, we don't have that little 2-stack. I'm recording this on my laptop, so it might be slightly different. We're going to go to the library, and here you can see we've got that little stack icon, which means that there's 2 photos here. If we click on that, it will separate them. And we've got our 1 of 2 and our 2 of 2. 1 of 2 here is our enhanced noise reduction DNG. So this is the denoised file. This one here, 2 of 2, is just our normal raw file. And if we zoom in and switch back and forth, you can see the difference here. A lot of noise relative to this photo, which is super clean. I mean, this is really cool. It's a good time to be a photographer. Next, we're going to go into lens corrections, and we'll get an appropriate photo here to do lens corrections. I think we had done this little firm up it over here. All right, so we're just going to reset this photo. You'll see that profile corrections on this photo are applied already. And we will just uncheck that. And we're going to pretend like it wasn't checked, because this is something that I would recommend that you do with a lot of your photos when you either import them or before you edit them. Here we have a photo straight out of camera, and we can see that there's some vignetting, which is to say the corners are a little bit darker than, a center to corner even exposure might give us. So if we hit profile corrections, you're going to notice something happening. The corners, for instance, darken or lighten up. And why is this happening? Well, a profile correction is in place to correct some of the, I don't want to say deficiencies, but let's say characteristics of the lens which weren't able to be corrected when the lens itself was made and designed. Depending on the lens, vignetting might just be a natural result of the lens's design, and it might just need to be something that exists in the lens. But luckily, we can really easily get around it with profile correction. So this is doing more than just correcting the vignetting, I should say. This is like a set of corrections that's specific to this model of lens from this brand for this camera system. Essentially, you have in this lens corrections window, this make drop down, and we've got every sort of manufacturer almost making lenses, even down to things like Apple for the iPhone. Underneath that, we have the model. It's the model of the lens. And it can be quite an extensive list depending on the manufacturer. And this actually also takes into account something else which you might not expect. Let's say if you were doing animal or wildlife rather, and there's birds far away and you've got a big long lens, but you have a teleconverter. This profile, you can sometimes, not always, but if the manufacturer's provided it, get a profile for that model of lens with whatever model of teleconverter. And they've got all those corrections built in. It's pretty cool. Here we only have one choice, camera settings for our profile. Right underneath here, we have two sliders, distortion and vignetting. If I slide vignetting all the way to the right, you see that the corners get brighter. All the way to the left, you see that they go dark again. The reason this manual adjustment is here is because when they profile a lens, they profile an example, or maybe a couple of examples, and they average them. But they can't profile every lens, and indeed, every lens is its own unique special snowflake. Every copy of every lens has slightly different, alignment of everything, even just by a micron or smaller. And all of these things can add up to having one lens look a little different than whatever the quote-unquote standard lens would be. These adjustments for vignetting and distortion, which isn't really doing much. Guess there was not really any distortion in that image. These are in place to help you fine-tune the results to your particular lens. There's also a remove chromatic aberration check, which we will look at in a moment. We're going to go to manual. And here we have the same type of corrections, but instead of it being built into a profile, we have full manual control. And you can use both. You can put a profile on and then go into manual and touch up anything that maybe didn't make the cut the first time. There's a defringe tool right here. We're going to wait on that one and teach you more about that here soon. Here we go. We've got the aurora. It's early morning, so the sun is just starting to come up and wash the stars out here in a field with a barn. And we're going to zoom in real close, like 400%, right up here. Now this is a good example. If you see there's a blue line all the way up here, and then on the opposite there's a green. So on one side you'll get blue, on the right side, and then on the left hand side of a high contrast area, you've got a dark barn and a comparatively brighter sky, for instance. In these cases, what will happen is you might get this chromatic aberration or fringing. And we'll go down to lens corrections and we'll click enable profile corrections. It's just going to help correct for some of the other stuff, and then remove chromatic aberration. And look at that. I'll check it off, check it on, check it off, check it on. Just like that, it's removed almost all of the blue purple, and it's removed the yellowiness or yellow greeniness from the other opposite side. So that's pretty useful. So you see here, we're still not out of the woods regarding fringing and whatnot here. So we're going to come here to manual, and we're going to select this dropper. We're going to hover over our offending color and click, and we did it. We basically fixed all of that with one click. Let's go look around. Yeah, it all looks good from here. Yeah, that's a very, very powerful tool when you have an application like that that can benefit from it. That said, it's not perfect. If we come over here and we look at the stars, you will find that something has gone awry. There are some odd color artifacts, even some rather rectangular, square-shaped artifacts. This is a direct result of what we just did when we fixed the chromatic aberration down on that barn. So what is the remedy here? Well, we got everything like we needed it to be over here. Now we have to compensate. If you come over here in the defringe window, or the defringe section of the lens correction window here, we do have two different color ranges, purple and green, and we have the ability to change the amount, and this is the amount of defringing. When we use the dropper tool, we fed it a certain color range and a certain amount of defringing. So essentially what we have to do now is undo some of that. I'm just going to back off the purple defringing amount a little bit. You can see it's now de-emphasized well, not in every case, but de-emphasize some of that weirdness around the stars. I'm going to go one more. There you go. That's kind of balanced that problem out. As you can imagine, though, when we've done so, we might have introduced a little bit of aberration, chromatic aberration back here. And I can see just like a hint of purple here along the roof, but I think that's really acceptable. When you use the dropper, it'll, like I said, select a range and it'll select an amount to defringe. You can adjust these manually. As you can see, the colors are kind of contiguous. The green heads into the cyans, and then that picks up into the purples and goes towards more magenta, kind of pinky colors. So depending on your exact situation, you might need to adjust those manually, but it's, for now, luckily, we just could back off that amount of defringing and we were good. Now at the top here, we have distortion. We also at the bottom have vignetting. And we're going to use this photo. I think in class I used a different photo to demonstrate this, but we're going to use it here. We're going to just uncheck profile corrections for a moment. And if you were paying attention, it'll look like the photo moved. When I click it on, click it off, click it on, click it off, click it on. And we are seeing a couple things happening. And it's no coincidence here that we have distortion and vignetting sliders at the bottom here. What this means is when we use a profile correction, it's gonna fix any distortion which is due to the fact that you're bending light through sort of curved surfaces and trying to focus on a flat surface. You're going to get some distortion in your images due to geometry. It's going to correct that geometry. And let's see if I can find a good example. If you look up at these stars in the top left-hand corner, you can see when I click this button, they actually get closer to the edges. What's happening here is that the program's actually deforming the image. It's stretching it out, and you're actually losing some pixels around the edges. This particular image isn't too bad. It has what we call the barrel distortion. If you remember that being mentioned, where the middle kind of bulbs out a little bit. Sort of, actually, can I demonstrate it here? I'll just turn that on. Nope, can't. Well, this is a good time as any to show you that you can adjust the slider here. The reason you can manually tweak the corrections here is because every copy of every lens is different. So even if one lens performed in one way and they built this profile using that lens, you might find that yours just needs a little extra help. To be honest, in a photo like this, you'll never know. And it's not even that important to do it unless you're really concerned about the horizon line being straight. But, in most cases, in a situation like this, there's no frame of reference. But if you're taking architectural photography or photography with lots of parallel lines that might need to stay parallel, this is where this can come in handy. And you know what? Because of the extra effects on vignetting that it provides, I'll just adjust the vignetting again. If you'll remember, it's how darkened the corners are. Here we can tweak it. We can even make them a little too light. But those effects, and sometimes the profile will apply like a general brightening to the whole image, or like it'll appear as such because the vignetting might have intruded almost all the way to the center of the image. I would always basically check that little checkbox. But in this case, we have a little bit of distortion and we are correcting it. If we come here, manual, we do have distortion at the top, vignetting at the bottom. I can actually, there we go. That's some barrel distortion for you. If you want to know what barrel distortion looks like, this is what it looks like. It's coming right out of the screen at you, basically. Pin cushion is the opposite. And this is showing you why the program needs to crop. Here you'll see I have constrain crop unchecked. So that's not going to show up when you're doing this. If you were to click it, all of a sudden that weird shape's gone. Why? Well, it's basically zooming in and cropping. I uncheck it. Why is it not changing? What's going on? Well, you can see there's a little dot under crop. It's now actually applied a crop. Just going to reset that, go back to edit, and we'll enjoy our really wonky, stretched out photo here. So you can imagine if this is barrel distortion and this is quote unquote kind of flat, in the other direction where things kind of push into the screen or into the photo, that's pin cushion. And the recipe to fix that is to literally stretch everything out in the opposite direction. Right? It's the recipe, or it's the fix for each of them is to do the opposite. And as I mentioned in class, these days we have cameras that have a lot of megapixels. There's a lot of resolution. So when we have to stretch some and, crop a little bit and maybe lose a little bit of detail and stuff, it's not a big deal because we still have plenty of resolution to have a nice photo here. Vignetting at the bottom, you can actually use this for artistic effect if you want, but you can actually increase or decrease it. When you are any value here other than 0, you'll notice that you now have also access to the midpoint. And I'll try and demonstrate that. I'll darken it up there and I'll turn the profile off. So this is about as dark a vignetting as I can get. And if I move my midpoint, you can see it will either encroach on the center of the frame more, or it'll pull itself back and relegate itself mostly to the corners. You can imagine that there's like a circle, and right now the circle is quite big, and as we change that midpoint, it's closing the circle down, and right now, like maybe only the center of the frame is free of vignetting, and nowhere else is. So that is how you play with that, and it can come in handy, especially if you get a copy of a lens that's not, matching up exactly with the profile. Although this one I think probably is pretty good. Maybe it benefits from a little tweak. Maybe it needed a little extra vignetting in the corners there to my eye, but I can't tell you if I'd ever notice otherwise. So yeah, so we've done that. We're going to go on here to transformations, which is the next editing tool. I think we are using this photo. So transformation is right here below lens corrections. And this is a tool that deals with straight lines and correcting the photo when those lines are not straight. This is really useful in architectural photography where essentially, actually I can probably approximate it. There we go. Imagine for a second that you're at the bottom of a high rise and you're looking up and you've got your camera and you're trying to take a photo. things that are closer to you are going to be bigger. The base of the building. Let's just pretend this is a building for a second. And things that are small or further away from you are going to appear smaller, such as the top of the building. Statistically, the top of a skyscraper is much further away from you than you are to the base of it when you're standing near it. And other obvious things, right? So what this tool is meant to do is it's meant to actually take this into account and bend and warp the photo to make it look like the building is just stock straight. So in this case, I can come here and readjust these little guides. Just gonna tweak it. You can put a lot of hands-on in here if you want. And of course, that's real life is 3 dimensions. We're dealing with 2 dimensions, so you have your vertical and your horizontal adjustments. It gives us 4 guides so that you can do essentially bound the vertical and the horizontal dimensions of whatever you're trying to straighten. So here now, I think arguably this window is going to be pretty squared off. I think if you took a protractor, we might find that these are pretty close to 90-degree angles. Of course, the rest of the photo here is a little bit wonky now, but we can ignore that for now. Here we can see we were using this little tool here, the guided. We click off, it kind of resets back to how it was taken. We can click auto and, more or less save ourselves all the work. Click back on the tool. Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of difference, right? So you might want to try things out. I feel like auto has also corrected for a lot of the other geometry. Guided, of course, because we're using guides. Level, gonna find a level. Vertical, it's gonna adjust for the verticals. This is when it's gonna be important, is when you're dealing with a situation where the vertical lines are what you really want to focus on, and perhaps the horizontal lines aren't actually perpendicular to the ground, or parallel to the ground rather. And then we have full, and I believe full just does everything, both horizontal and vertical. We'll click off here. You'll notice right below all these handy dandy buttons, we have this transform sort of bunch of slider adjusters, and it's everything that we just kind of went through. You also notice there's a constrained crop at the bottom here, just like there was here when we're playing with distortion, just like there is in the cropping tool. These are all the same thing. If I click this on, this one will turn on, this one will turn on. If I click this off, the opposite. And I think we probably all remember at this point, because it was only a minute ago, what this does. When you mess with something and it ends up going out of the geometry of your original photo, it will crop in to get rid of the white. It'll give you the maximum usable photo area, I guess. But we'll go through these real quick. Transform vertical, you can see it'll essentially change that in a vertical direction, stretch it out. Almost looks like it leans back or leans forward a little bit. But that's dealing with the vertical lines. Horizontal, of course, we're dealing with that particular transformation. It's the same thing as vertical, just in the other axis. Rotate, hopefully everyone kind of can grasp that one. You can rotate here or in the crop menu when you're doing some straightening. Aspect. So aspect, this has to do with the aspect ratio of the photo. And here it's basically stretching it tall or squishing it horizontally. Scale, again, hopefully everyone kind of intuitively knows what that means, but this is what it means if you didn't know. And X and Y offset, just think of a graph. X-axis is on the bottom, left and right. You're offsetting the image to the left or right. Y-axis is the opposite, up and down. And that's transform. Very useful for architectural photography or anything where you have straight lines that you need to maintain their perpendicular arrangement. Lens blur, we did just mention this briefly. I'm not going to go into it at this point in time for a couple of reasons. One, it is, as you can see, early access, so it hasn't really hit prime time yet. But also, it's not really that difficult to use, basically. And this is where you can get the same effect that your phone gets trying to replicate a shallow depth of field from like a fast lens, like, say you've got like a f1.4 50 millimeter lens and you're taking a portrait of somebody and you've got a really nice separation from the background, and then you try and do the same thing on your phone and you got the subject in focus, but the whole background and foreground is also kind of in focus. So the phones now, intelligently try and mask off the person and then blur the background and foreground. That's what this is. It's trying to artificially blur the background and foreground. Then we have effects. And here we can do some post-crop vignetting, for instance. So let's crop this image down. All right. So in reality, our vignetting, if it exists in this image, exists in the true corners that the lens sort of projected, right? But we're going to crop the photo in, so we're now well past wherever the vignetting would have happened, essentially. But I can actually add vignetting. And if you want to look like an old-timey photo, you can do that. But I can add vignetting in and post based on the crop, because vignetting can be a useful effect sometimes. It provides some subtle framing. It's something that people expect to see in a photo. It's not jarring. I mean, this might be jarring, but some vignetting, happens with most lenses. So people are used to seeing it. So it can be a way to get a particular artistic effect, or, like I said, just subtle framing to focus people in towards the center. You can change the roundness here and the midpoint. So midpoint will bring it closer or stretch it out. Roundness will deal with the actual roundness of the vignetting there. Feathering deals with how much of a transition there is from vignette to not vignette. I mean, this is pretty clear what's going on. And then highlights, I'm going to be honest, I don't use this tool often enough to know what this is doing. And it doesn't appear to be doing anything noticeably discernible. So we're going to have to leave this one to Adobe's help website. Modify post-crop vignette highlights. Yeah, I don't use this enough to really know why that would be useful. It probably depends on where and how the highlights are, I would imagine. Let's try. Yeah, and it only applies if you go positive, you go into the white, this highlights no longer applies. You go even one click down into the vignette. Yeah, you don't want me to just sit here trying to figure it out when any of us could just look on the internet. Anyway, here we zoom in to this random spot. We can actually add grain in. Look at that. So this is I'm going to imagine that this is actually just a fixed texture that the program uses. I would be interested to see if the same pattern that you see here repeats itself over and over again at any point. But this is trying to, ironically, kind of like put almost noise back in the image to make it look a little bit grittier. And grain, it's film grain. It's what it's modeled after. It's to give the photos a little bit of extra crunchiness, maybe a little bit of that vintage aesthetic. And yeah, I mean, depending on the exact photo, I could see myself using that, but haven't found that photo yet. So that's effects. And last but not least, here we have calibration. So calibration Here we can kind of change some main or basal parameters of things, and I don't know that we would actually want to or need to in most cases. Let's take a look at this vending machine. There is a reason why this menu item is at the bottom. You're likely not going to have too much need of it. So let's say you wanted to mess with the exact tint in the shadows. You could use the tone curve. You could come here, green, shadows, you could put green or magenta tint into the shadows and the midtones and the highlights if you wanted to. But here, if you just want to do like a global kind of tweak, then that's going to accomplish that. The red primary. So we are seeing these photos and they're being represented to us just as they were taken in red, green, and blue. And so here we can tweak some things. So we can tweak the exact hue of the primary red, which is it's actually kind of cool. Would orange Coca-Cola taste good? I know orange Kit Kats are pretty cool. Anyway, you can adjust the saturation as well. So that'll deal with the the three primary colors of the entire photo. And perhaps if you imported a color checker chart or something, you could tweak this stuff until you got it right, quote unquote right. If you are going to look into color checker, I might suggest buying one that comes essentially with a software download. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry too much about it. Where is it? Baby's photo, I have need of you. All right. So right here, this is a color checker. This is really old. This was back when it was Gretag Macbeth. This is probably now, I'm going to say this would be the X-Rite color checker. And there's an equivalent one from a company called Data Color. I think I have that one. And essentially what you do is you can take a picture of this in real life with your camera, and then you feed that picture to the software. The software knows what all these colors are supposed to be. It figures it out. At least the one I have now can actually just give me a preset in Lightroom that will, based on this information, tweak everything in the photo to make sure the colors are quote unquote accurate. And then I can, continue editing from there. Whether or not that's ever worth it to you is going to really depend, because accurate doesn't always jive with artistic intent. But there's a little extra bonus for anyone who listened to this online instead of just in class. I think we've covered everything here. We've done some editing. Oh, last but not least, there was a couple of things we did towards the end. Let's say I have a bunch of photos of this porcupine. So I'm adjusting, I'm doing all kinds of stuff, making the porcupine the best porcupine it could be. Now I have another photo of a porcupine. I don't want to have to come back and forth and do all that stuff. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to select the photo that I have the edits that I want them to be replicated from. I'm going to find the other photo, and if the photo's right next to it, or maybe if there's 5 photos, I'll just show you how it works. I will hold the shift key. I'll just select all these photos. See how it selected all of them? So that's one way to do it. Let's say wanted to do only a couple of photos. You can hold Control or Command, or I think Control on PC, but Command on Mac, and you can select individual photos. They can be anywhere in this ribbon, does not matter, as long as you started off with your original photo here. So that's another way you can select, and we haven't got to the actual magic yet, so keep that in mind. Here I'm just going to select the one next to it, because that's the one that I want to apply the edits to. So now once we've done that, this from previous, you'll see it would have said previous. Well, now it is changed to sync. And if you click this button, you'll get this menu. And you can synchronize all of the stuff you did. By default, it's going to have a lot of this checked off. I think curve usually is, effects usually is, usually what is not selected will be things that could be specific to an image, such as cropping, straightening an image, transforming, any local healing, and masking. If memory serves, some of this stuff like masking, they'll use AI to, let's say that it was the same porcupine, but the porcupine moved and I had done a bunch of masking. I believe that the robot will interpret that for the new photo. However, your mileage may vary, right? But if you're dealing with something outside of masking, like this case, we just did some normal edits. I mean, they were just random edits, but normal edits. Most of this being checked will be good. Anything that could be localized edits will be unchecked. You just click synchronize, and it'll take longer if there's more than one photo, right? But here's our original porcupine, and here's after we pasted the edits. So as you can see, that's a really convenient way if you want to actually copy paste those to a bunch of different photos. In my case, I use it a ton because I do a ton of time lapses, and when you look at some of the Milky Way photos that I've provided, like, it takes a lot to turn this into something you can actually use. And if you've got 900 of this exact same composition, the only thing that's changed is that the Milky Way is kind of like moved to the right a little bit over that time. Well, you don't really need to edit each photo separately. You could just sync the edits from the first one across all of them. All right. And actually, let's go back to our porcupine. So we've got our porcupine. So let's say I really love this look. Well, maybe I'm in a studio setting and I've developed a good look with, my flashes and stuff. Or maybe I took photos of a wedding or event and I edited, and I just really liked the look, and I could sync things across, but it's something that I kind of want to keep around. I want to have at the ready, and that I might be able to actually apply between different situations. Well, we can create our own preset. We've talked about presets, but we haven't actually done it yet. So you can click on presets over here. There's a little plus sign. You click on the plus sign. Here you have 3 choices. The one we use is create. And you can call it porcupine. And it's going to be put in the group user presets. You can have it go in one of the other groups. You can make a new group. User presets works fine for me. And here again, similar to what we just saw in the sync menu, you'll get all these different options. Of course, the ones that are like local transformations, like transform, calibration, masking isn't even coming to play here. Those are going to be either unchecked or grayed out. We have support amount slider. This is the amount slider right here. When you apply a preset, the slider is right in the middle. And if you go less or more, it just applies a multiplier. If you go, less, it'll, go, well, half of whatever the edits are. If you go more, it'll go, okay, maybe like 150% of whatever the edits are. So that can be useful if any given photo maybe needed a little bit or a little less, a little bit more, a little bit less magic. That being said, we've got our preset named. We click create. It will create our preset. And now it's under here in user presets, porcupine. And I'll show you how easy this can be. I'm going to reset it. Here we've got stock porcupine. Here we've got glam porcupine. We're going to go back to stock porcupine, go to our presets. If you mouse over, it'll show you a preview of what the edits look like when edited. You can see on the right-hand side, nothing's happening. Just mousing over. That way you can scroll through and like really quickly assess if there's a certain look that might be good if you have a lot of presets. In this case, we just click on it. It will then apply all those edits. And we can use this as a starting point, or you know what? If this porcupine, we don't think he's going to be kind of a picky client, and we don't really feel like we have to edit each and every frame down perfectly, we can just slap a preset on it, and the porcupine's going to be fine with those deliverables. That's great. We'll just roll with that. And speaking of which, what about those deliverables? Well, we can go to library. We've got our porcupine, and we want to get this porcupine, get this photo sent out to it or uploaded on our website or whatever. So we go down bottom left-hand corner where it said import. Right next to it is export. We click export. We get this handy dandy menu here. We have these presets. These presets are not developing presets like with our Glam Porcupine. These presets are exporting presets. It's presets of these particular parameters, which I'm going to go through and is going to be exciting as heck. So if we click on export to, we have some standard choices, and depending on what kind of software and plugins you have, you might have more. I have more because I have lots of plugins. But hard drive is a good place as any for our photo to go. We certainly probably aren't burning it to a CD or a DVD in 2024. Export location. Export to a specific folder. Same folder as original photo. Choose folder later. Useful for presets. Yeah, because this would be weird because you wouldn't be able to export it unless you had a folder chosen. But this is mostly for presets, it looks like. And here's some common ones that might have been used already. Specific folder. The folder is named right here. You can choose it using, you got two choices. This drop-down menu, which should give you like a quick access to recent places, or you can click choose. It will bring you to this dialog where you can explore through the Finder and figure out which exact place you want to export it to. If you want a folder, put in subfolder. Here you can see I had one called Weird Bug because I guess I exported pictures of a weird bug. Oh, I did. I had pictures of a cicada that I found on a hike around town one day. And so there. If you have that unchecked, it'll just go, in this case, to the desktop. If you click this, it will create the folder Weird Bug on my desktop, unless it's already there. If it's already there, it'll just export to the folder. You can add to catalog, meaning this catalog that you're working with. If the files exist, you can skip. File naming, you can rename the files. Here you can see an example of how I do it. We have custom name sequence, custom name original file number. You can have just custom name, all kinds of choices, date, file names, etc., etc. You can add more, edit that menu. Here you can see I had Aurora. Aurora happened on May 5th. This was the camera I used because I had I must have had over 9,999 images, I would imagine. So I use this sort of way of doing it. I start at whatever base 10 it is that has the amount of digits, because here I know that I can go all the way up to basically, I can put 90,000 photos before that starts to run out of digits. And here the first photo will be named 10,000, and then the second 10,001, etc., etc. And this basically just keeps it straight in my video NLE when I'm doing the actual time lapse. So that's too much information. No one needs that. This ended up being quite long. Here we have video. We're not dealing with video. So skip over that. File settings. You can export as a bunch of different files. If you want the original RAW file format or a digital negative, you can convert it to a DNG RAW, Photoshop document, TIFF, PNG, JPEG. No idea what that is. JPEG XL, that seems like something that never took off. I've certainly never used it. But we use JPEG. I like to have my quality high. if you were doing something specific and you knew that you could only do like a 9 megabyte file, well, you would have to do that here. You could limit it. Color space, if you remember when that was brought up in the first session there, color space, you get several choices. sRGB is the lowest common denominator color space. That's going to have the lowest common denominator colors that pretty much any device can display, going back probably to the 90s. As well, this is going to jive with printing. We don't have the ability to represent as many colors when printing as we do digitally. So with our fancy new LCD monitors and everything. So this is a good one to use. If you need any of the other ones, you're going to probably know it. The only other one you might ever use is Adobe RGB. Display P3 is mostly specific to Apple and its inbuilt displays in its laptops and computers. And then Pro Photo, that's kind of dealing above our pay grade, to be honest. And Rec 2020, don't even worry about that. So sRGB, we're not doing HDR output. We're gonna leave that alone. Remember, it's not quite ready for society. We don't have always the devices to display that. Image sizing, you can resize to fit. This is going to be pretty self-explanatory. A resolution of 75 pixels per inch or DPI is going to be the one that you're going to find most often is used for digital displays. If it's print, it's probably going to be 240 pixels per inch most of the time. Sorry, I hope I'm not giving anyone motion sickness by scrolling around there. Output sharpening, you can do some output sharpening here. Obviously, we have some paper types here and screen, and I wouldn't really. If you, after doing all that work, if you're doing some extra sharpening on the back end here, I would just suggest doing it in something like Photoshop later. Metadata, you can do all kinds of stuff. If you do copyright only, you will find that if you have copyright data basically in your file, metadata, it will put that. Copyright can be important for photographers. You do want to make sure that your work is represented by you. There are other options. You can include all metadata. Depending on what you choose, you might also be able to choose to remove person info and remove location info. And what this will do is this will help anonymize. Let's just pretend that's the way you say that word. The location, if you had any GPS coordinates. For instance, if you're taking pictures of your house or whatever, and you might not want anyone who downloads that photo to have the exact GPS coordinates of your house, it's good to uncheck that one. I usually keep it copyright only. That'll wipe everything. It'll wipe the camera, the lens, it'll wipe all of the metadata out of there, except for the copyright. And you know what? If you need the metadata, choose something like this. But if you're tossing something up on Instagram, it might not really matter. Watermarking, you can add a watermark. I don't usually recommend watermarks. I think that we're in a place now where they're sort of redundant because they're, I guess, not effective. You can get AI to just undo the watermark on any photo nowadays. So in this regard, that kind of removes the reason for using a watermark, which is to kind of like protect your intellectual property. For watermarking, when it comes to, wanting your name on the photo and or your logo and making sure that, people know it's you. I've seen more bad watermarking than I've seen good. I think people tend to really overdo it. If you spend an hour on a photo in Photoshop or in Lightroom here, editing it, and then you stick an icon or a name or something on top of it, whether you like it or not, that's going to draw the eye. It's going to detract from your photo. So, use your discretion. You're all adults. You can do whatever you want, but I might suggest some restraint when doing any watermarking. And then last but not least, post-processing. So what do we want to happen after we open or after it's exported? Let's say we know we immediately, like is the case for me sometimes, want to open it in Photoshop because we need to continue editing because there's some plugins and tools in Photoshop that only will do the thing that I want them to, that can be done there or whatever. This is where that would come into play. Do nothing is usually a good choice if you don't want to continue editing it immediately. And then all you have to do is click export, and it will export. That little progress bar in the top hand left will pop up, and away you go. And we did a little run through of that here, doing both JPEG, and then I believe we also did the DNG. And when we do the DNG, or was it the original? Might have been the original. So the original, you won't get any options. DNG, you do get some choices, and I would just mostly avoid lossy compression. Lossy means you're losing information. We don't want that. And what we could do, if you remember when we did the denoise for the porcupine, we ended up with 2 files. Well, here you can actually, if I'm going to make a DNG, you can embed the original RAW file. This is going to probably make it around twice as big because it's 2 RAWs for one, or at least 2 RAWs in the same shell, basically. So, yeah, if you need it, it's there. But you could do that, click, and it will output the RAW, which you can, bring to somebody else or provide to an editor or who knows what. But if you're, distributing to clients or online or whatever, JPEG is probably going to be where you're going to want to be. All right. That took way longer than I thought it was going to, which is probably unsurprising to anyone who's met me. So I hope you found that useful. And watch for the last one. Or, if this might be in the future, the last one might already be up. All right. Thanks so much. I hope you found this useful. Take care.